I have spent 41 years classifying the ways living things die from chemistry. Not from violence, not from disease in the familiar sense. Compounds, from the precise elegant brutality of a molecule that fits a receptor the wrong way, or the right way, depending on your definitions. I have catalogued venoms from 19 worlds. I have indexed the Corinth alkaloids that dissolve synaptic tissue in under 8 seconds, film-veal membrane disruptors that cause cardiac crystallization in species with copper-based blood, the quiet toxins from the deep thermal vents of Haas thori that do nothing at all to most organisms and stop a Tuvari elder mid-sentence. Without a sound, I am, by any reasonable measure, the foremost authority on health chemistry in the conclave's scientific establishment. I am telling you this so that you understand what it meant when I wrote, in my final report, that I had encountered a species for which I had no category. The human's name was Dara Vase. She was a xenobiological liaison assigned to the conclave's new cross-species exchange program, a diplomatic arrangement that was, on its surface, about building mutual understanding, and was, in practice, about both sides quietly studying each other. I was studying her. She knew it. She did not appear to mind. She was 34 years old by her own calendar. Medium height, dark hair. She arrived at Laboratory 12 on the first morning of the exchange, carrying a small container of liquid she called coffee, which she drank before I had finished calibrating the first instrument array. I made a note of the liquid. I would return to it. The formal protocol called for a series of baseline physiological assessments, standard procedure for any new species entering long-term conclave facilities, diet tolerances, atmospheric sensitivities, surface contact reactions. We were not testing lethality. That was not the arrangement. We were testing thresholds, establishing the parameters of safe coexistence. There is a difference. I began with contact assessments. The Corinth alkaloid series, at concentrations 1/10 of their standard working strength, applied to a skin patch no larger than my smallest finger. At full strength, the series causes immediate subdermal inflammation in every species we have tested. 7 documented, including one with a silicate-based epidermis that we had assumed would be impervious. At 1/10 strength, we expected a localized reaction.
Yes.
Mild tissue response, enough to establish her sensitivity range and begin calibrating the rest of the protocol. She looked at the patch on her forearm for approximately 4 seconds. "Does it sting?" I asked, through the translator array. "A little," she said, "like nettles." I did not know what nettles were. I looked it up later. They are a plant on her world that causes surface irritation on contact. Comparison was, apparently, meant to convey that the sensation was minor and familiar. I stared at the patch. The inflammation that should have been visible within 90 seconds was not appearing. I increased the monitoring sensitivity. There was a faint vascular response. Her subcutaneous circulation had registered the compound and, as near as I could measure, done something to it, assessed it, neutralized it. I was not certain which word applied. I ran the test at 1/5 strength, then at half, then at working concentration, which I will not specify here, because working concentration is, under conclave research guidelines, a controlled figure for good reason. At working concentration, she said it stung a bit more. She rubbed the patch with her opposite thumb. Within 6 minutes, the inflammation was gone. I sat very still for a while. Then I continued because I am a scientist, and the only appropriate response to an anomalous result is more data. We moved to ingestion trials. This was the part of the protocol I had been most conservative about, the part where I had filed the most caveats with, the oversight board, where I had prepared the most extensive medical contingency plan, where I had the emergency response team on quiet standby in the anteroom. Not because I intended to approach dangerous thresholds, because I am careful, and careful people prepare for what they do not intend. I began with the Veln series at low dilution, concentrations that would, in a Tuvari adult of typical body mass, induce measurable cardiac disruption within 20 minutes. In a Garathi, paralysis of the secondary respiratory tract in under an hour. These are not guesses. These are documented, replicated, peer-reviewed figures that took 4 decades of careful study to establish. I mixed the compound into a neutral liquid carrier and explained, through the translator, that I was going to ask her to consume a small quantity of a chemical solution and that she should tell me immediately if she experienced any discomfort. She picked up the cup. She looked at it. She said, "What does it taste like?" I told her I did not know. She drank it. She made a face. "Bitter," she said, "like bad medicine." I watched my monitors for the next 40 minutes. Her cardiac rhythm was steady. Her respiratory function was unaffected. Watched a compound that I have personally seen immobilize a Garathi research assistant. A being massing nearly twice what she did, move through system and produce no clinically significant effect whatsoever. My instruments showed her liver was doing something. Kidneys were doing something. Whatever her internal chemistry did to the Velm series, it did it quietly, efficiently, and apparently without distress. I increased the concentration. I want to be clear that I did not do this carelessly. I increased it in small steps, each time explaining to her what I was doing, each time receiving her calm acknowledgement. At each step, her self-reported symptom was the same: bitter, unpleasant, not alarming. At the fourth step, a concentration I will describe only as significantly beyond what I had believed any biological system could process through metabolic means alone. She paused after drinking and said, "I feel a little warm." Checked her core temperature. It had risen by 0.3 degrees on her scale. It returned to baseline in 11 minutes. I set down my instrument. "I am going to tell you what I did next, and I want you to understand that it was not careless, and it was not reckless, and I would make the same decision again, because the data required it." I retrieved, from the controlled storage unit at the rear of Laboratory 12, a sample of Haas IV thermal vent extract, the quiet toxin, the one that stops a too very elder mid-sentence without a sound. I had never administered it to a living subject outside of accidental exposure documentation. I had it in the laboratory because I was building a reference index, and it was a reference compound. I had not imagined, when I brought it to this building, that I would ever consider using it in a live trial. I prepared a solution at the lowest documentable threshold. The concentration at which we have observed effect in the Tuvari is the most resistant species for which we have clean data. I explained to Dara Weiss that I was now working with a compound from a different classification tier. I told her honestly that I did not know what to expect. I told her she could decline. She said, "Is this the interesting one?" I told her it might be. She drank it. We sat together in Laboratory 12 for 1 hour and 19 minutes. I watched every monitor I had. Cardiovascular system continued its steady, unremarkable rhythm. Her neural activity showed no irregular patterning. At the 40-minute mark, she asked if I had anything to read, and I gave her a data tablet loaded with Conclave public archives, and she read quietly while I watched her not die from the compound that I have. In my private notes, always called the sentence ender. At the end of the hour, she set the tablet down and looked at me. "Was that it?" she asked. I told her yes. She nodded slowly. She did not seem surprised. She seemed, if I am reading her expression correctly, and I have since spent considerable time learning to read her expressions, mildly curious about what I had found, not about what might have happened to her. The latter did not appear to be a thing she had thought about very much. I thought about it. I thought about it for the remainder of that session, and for most of the 3 days following. I went back, eventually, to my note about the coffee. I looked up the compound, caffeine, a methylxanthine alkaloid, a central nervous system stimulant of measurable potency, one that, in the Garathi, induces cardiac arrhythmia at ordinary consumption levels, and in the Tuvari, causes a hallucinatory state their physicians classify as a medical emergency. Dara Weiss consumed approximately 340 milligrams of it every morning before she had spoken a word to me. In a liquid she drank for pleasure, out of a container she carried from home. I pulled her exchange program intake documentation. She had listed her daily coffee intake under dietary habits. Under known sensitivities, she had written, "None significant." I filed my preliminary report to the Conclave Oversight Board 14 days into the exchange. The report was 41 pages. The executive summary was 2 sentences. The first sentence noted that, of the 26 compounds administered across the trial series, none had produced an effect in the human subject that required medical intervention or exceeded the subject's self-reported tolerance. The second sentence said that I was recommending a full reclassification review of the assumptions underlying our interspecies chemical safety framework, and that I was doing so on the basis of data I could not explain and could not dismiss and had not been trained to anticipate. Dara Vase was still in the building when I sent the report. She was in the common area 2 corridors down, eating her midday meal, and, I am told, chatting pleasantly with the junior members of my research search, who had begun, over the 2 weeks, to find her considerably less alarming than they had initially. I walked past on my way to the archive. I did not stop. She looked up and said, "Same time tomorrow?" I told her yes. I did not tell her that I had already ordered a new controlled storage unit, that I had already begun drafting the expanded trial proposal, that I had gone home the previous evening and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about 41 years of certainty and the quiet, unremarkable way it had come apart under the fluorescent lights of Laboratory 12, while a human woman read our public archives and waited to feel something that never arrived. There are things in this work that you expect to discover. There are things that, when you find them, fit into the shape of what you already knew. They enlarge it, they refine it, but the shape holds. And then, rarely, perhaps once in a career, if you are the kind of scientist who deserves the word, you find something that does not fit any shape you have. Classification Index has 19 worlds in it. I am beginning the process of building a 20th entry. The heading for now reads, "Subjects demonstrate metabolic processing of compounds across all tested toxicological tiers. Mechanism unclear. Upper threshold not yet established." I have no closing note. I do not, for the first time in 41 years, know what the closing note should say. I suppose I will find out tomorrow.